Hello everybody, welcome to today's Facebook Live. It is 6 o'clock and I am here in Fort Worth, Texas, where it has been torrentially raining today, so everything is flooded, and I'm glad to paint flowers, pretty much. And we are going to learn tonight how to draw primroses, evening primroses. They're called a few other things. The yellow version are called buttercups. Here in Texas, the pink evening primrose is called the pink lady, so you might know them under a few different names. And then I'm going to take you through a quick introduction to painting those flowers as well. The free Facebook Floral Watercolor and Drawing Group. We have 1,500 members, a little bit over 1,500 members, and you can post your work in there. You can ask questions about supplies. You could just share your latest work. You can ask for critiques if you want, or if you just want to share something you're working on. There's a lot of beginners, and everybody is in there to draw and paint flowers, so it's a great place to be. So this is a little thing I painted earlier. It is some loose primroses, and so I think we're going to do that today. I'm going to do a really quick drawing tutorial about perspective because that's going to affect how we paint things. But then I'm going to do something similar to that that's just really loose and flowing and easy. So let me switch my camera angle here. So we're going to do a little perspective lesson here. And we did some perspective last week. What did we do that with? Black-eyed Susans, right? So we learned a little bit about the elliptical shapes of things and how you kind of want to draw those guidelines out for yourself. We're going to do the same thing with these flowers now. And then, as I keep telling you, when you do those guidelines and you know what the shape of things is, you have a better idea when you go to paint it, what you're painting as well. So an evening primrose or a buttercup, this kind of shape, is an elliptical flower from the top. So from the top, you would draw a circle, and they usually have 4 petals. Okay, they might have 5, but I have mostly seen them with 4 petals. So if it's going to be 4 petals, you would draw a mark at the center, and you would have your rays go through crisscross, and then you know exactly where you're going to be drawing your petal shapes. And of course, if you've been here for the last couple weeks, you know that I think you should practice your petal shapes first, right? So that when you go to draw them, you know exactly what you're doing. So there we have like the most basic form of our primrose. Okay, that's easy. Let's do it from the side where it's a little bit more difficult. So I would call this flower a cup or a bowl-shaped flower. And what that means is we're going to be drawing a circle in perspective. So that's an ellipse. And I like to give a little lesson on what that looks like. So this is a circle, this lid is a circle, but as I flip it on its side, you can see that it becomes kind of elongated. Okay, so even though it's still a circle, now it's a long oval, and eventually that just becomes a line. Okay, so that visual aid is really useful for when you're thinking about anything that has a circle on its side and thinking about the perspective of that. Okay, so we're going to draw an ellipse like this, big oval. And then just down here, a little dot for our guideline, our perspective. And then we're going to draw a bowl shape up and around there. Okay. And then I'm just going to do one guideline through this for this one, and I'll show you why in a minute. So this guideline still has it going through the center, and we're going to be drawing this petal and this petal here and here. But this petal, because of the way this is shaped, we're going to be seeing the underside of it. Okay, so that's the one that I would encourage you to do first. So we're going to come out and here and just draw the underside of that petal like that. And then we're going to be drawing the petals that will be on either side. And so instead of drawing a guideline there, that's the center of each petal. So I'm going to just ghost my line of that petal up here, through there, around, still touching that guideline, and then that line of the petal is going to come down. Do the same thing on the other side, so I'm coming up, and then the guideline actually can become that petal shape. And then back here we have our last one, so I'll just go like this, draw that in. Now if you're using a pencil for your guidelines, you can erase those pencil marks, and you're left with a beautiful cup or bowl-shaped flower, okay? So when you break it down like that, that's pretty easy, isn't it? Let me know in the comments how many people drew that along with me and are impressed at their amazing perspective ability now. Knowing that that's how you draw a flower like this, there's lots of other ways you could do it. You can also make it, let me think how I would do this. You could make it a little bit more, a little tighter, kind of like this, like a shallower bowl. So if we're doing this kind, the petal that you're going to get here in the front is going to be a lot longer and shallower. Okay, so that's just going to make it a much, I don't know, I keep using the word shallow, but that's all I can think of. A flower that doesn't have quite as much depth to it like that. Okay, so, but you can see the same thing, right? The same thing applies. We have our stem coming out of, always out of the center. Okay, and look at that. Doesn't that look good? So once you know how to draw something like this, and this is a pretty simple flower to draw. You know, it only has 4 petals. It's a bowl or a cup shape. It's pretty simple. So once you have a flower like that down, it's easy to make the jump from drawing to painting because you can start to imagine in your head where those petals are going to be. And you can start to do it eventually without even needing to draw the guidelines. You know, so if I wanted to draw this, I could kind of just make a little, that's the front petal, then I have the back petal here, right? And so soon you're able to make these more organic shapes without needing those guidelines. Pretty soon you're able to do things that look even more, and the guidelines are still there. You know, I could draw on top of this roughly where that bowl shape is, right? But eventually it becomes just second nature to kind of see in your head how things look. Sometimes with a complicated flower, I'll still draw out the perspective of it and I'll still draw out the different parts. But for the most part, this is a great warm-up for drawing and it's a great warm-up for painting. And that is what we're going to do next is paint it. So let me just have a sheet of paper under here. Let me grab that. Okay. Shanna Lynn says that she's late. There's no penalty for being late. Don't worry. I don't take attendance yet. Ha ha ha. Okay, so I'm going to try and keep that in the picture for you so you can still see it. We'll see how that goes. These pieces of paper are huge. Sandy says she drew along and she loves the steps for this one. Yeah, this one, it's pretty simple to draw. I actually think it's a little bit more difficult to paint this one just because of the way it's very light colored, a very delicate kind of coloring. And so that can be a little bit more challenging than some of the more vibrant ones. But let me just lift this up so you can see. I didn't completely finish this. I didn't put all the final steps in, but this is kind of what we're going for tonight. And you can see that I let the leaves bleed into the pink of the flowers a little bit, and I just like that. It's nice and loose, and I like that style. So I'm the one painting, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm getting my supplies out. I always have a paper towel nearby. I have my paints here. Oh, you know what? We're going to get a little crash course in cleaning up a paint palette because I didn't realize this was full of green paint. Okay, so I just have my paper towel full of water now, and I will just clean out, let me see what's the easiest. I'll just clean out this section here real quick. So I love watercolor because of how easy it is to clean up. And as you know by now, my palettes are usually pretty dirty because, well, one, because I'm lazy, but also because I like to just use these colors over and over again. It'd be a waste of paint to clean it out every time, especially things like greens. Green is more interesting when you can mix up your own greens and keep using them. Okay, so if you have a pipette, use your pipette. I do have one here. And I have my water, which is mostly clean. It is just slightly tinted blue. Put some water here in the palette, and I'll also put a few drops of water in my paints just to kind of wake them up and loosen them up a little bit. I have 2 brushes here tonight that I'm going to be using, and I have this number 8 Rosemary and Company brush, and that's a Kolinsky Sable. That's a really nice watercolor brush, and then I have this Master Stroke from Blick, Finest Red Sable, and that's a filbert, which is a different kind of shape. So you can use either of those. They're both fun to use. I think I'll start with the filbert tonight just to have something different. So I'm getting my brush wet, and I'm going to grab some pink paint here. Grab a little bit of this guy, mix that in. Okay. And you know by now that what I like to do, here I'll zoom in a little bit. What I like to do is start with water. Now I'm just going to do this really loosely and just kind of fill the page up with these. And I'm going to have them all coming out at different angles and bleeding together. And you should be able to see that in the reflection of the water. So knowing this from the bowl shape, I can kind of start out with just a little smiley face of a shape there and kind of come out with my petals with just water. And the reason I'm doing it with just water, there's a couple of reasons, but one of them is that this is a very delicate and a very light colored flower. So the water will help that preserve some of its daintiness. And a thing I always have to remind my students is that flowers like this are not going to look good in the first couple layers. They're going to look like blobs, and that is okay. I'm going to do one that's just straight on now. Sometimes I'll put some paint down and then go ahead and put the water on top of it. Okay, and I am keeping this one really, really light, really wet and loose as well. I'll just drop a few darker spots in here. Cass asks, do we loosen with our pipette rather than our paintbrush? I personally do, because it's a lot faster to fill my pipette up and just squeeze it into all of these things than to do it with my paintbrush. So if you have one, do it with your pipette. If you don't, just do it with your paintbrush or something else. Okay. And I'm kind of just drawing it out with the water for the first step. You can kind of see I'm just drawing it out to get the shape right, and then going in with my paint and dropping that in there. Okay, so we talked a little bit yesterday about this idea I had recently to have a membership of watercolor, flowers, and flower drawing, and all of the different things we could do with it. So has anybody thought more about that? Does anybody have any ideas for what you would love to see in a membership like that? If you do, I would love to know, because I think that I'm going to do it. And I think it's going to be awesome. So I belong to a couple memberships right now. I don't know if you guys have ever been interested in surface pattern design, but there's an artist out there. Her name is Bonnie Christine. And I absolutely love following Bonnie's career, and she is such a source of inspiration to me just about how you have a career as a creative, you know, the different challenges you have. It's different when you're a creative entrepreneur than when you're in a different industry. So I really like her course that she has, which is called Flourish. And that's a monthly membership that I belong to, and I love it. And I realized, like, I love to teach about painting and drawing flowers. Why shouldn't I also do a course for people who want to learn that too? So I think I'm going to start doing that. And, you know, I'm going through these techniques so fast in these free lessons, and I love it, you know, and I think it's great that everybody can rewatch them and it's fun. But how much cooler would it be to have a place where we can go over and over again and have a whole community and get to know each other? And, you know, I was thinking we could even do themes each month, and prizes and live coaching sessions. There's realistic flowers that I would love to teach people how to paint. You know, I keep showing you guys this. Let me see if I can find it. I keep showing you guys this watercolor that I did. And I can't teach you how to do this in a free Facebook lesson, you know, but I absolutely can teach you how to do this if we have 4 to 6 weeks to learn these different techniques and to have a live painting session and to go through how you actually do that. So I just think it would be so fun, and I can't stop thinking about it. I said it yesterday, but it's true. I've been lying awake at night thinking about all the cool things, the people I know who are experts in different parts of botany. And I have a good friend who's a master gardener, and she would be able to teach us so many interesting things about flowers, because the more you learn about flowers too, the better you become at painting. You know, the more you know, the more you are armed with that knowledge, the better it is. So I'm excited about it. So if you guys have any ideas or anything that you would like to see in there, I would love that. Okay. Shanna Lynn says, mist bottles work good too for loosening up your paint and palette. That's a very good point. Mist bottles work very well, especially if you want to re-wet your paints that you already have in your palette. And yes, flower illustration would be very cool in that too. So these are all pretty wet, and if, you know, we had more time, I would let it dry a little bit more, but it's fine. So I'm just going to grab a little yellow paint and put it in the middle here, and in some of these, it's still going to flow quite a bit. And like I said, I'm okay with that because this kind of technique I'm doing is very loose and wishy-washy. So I'm going to drop that yellow in, and I'm going to start grabbing some greens over here. Now, it is more interesting to mix up your own greens, but a lot of times the little cheat I'll do is to put some of the pre-mixed green in my palette. So this is Hooker's Green. And then I will add some extra things to it. So I am going to add a little bit of Payne's Gray for the darker parts of this. There we go. I love Payne's Gray. I think I was telling somebody today, if I had to pick just one color to paint with, I think it would be Payne's Gray. It's just so beautiful. So there we have this nice dark green. And I'm going to be adding other things to it as I paint. So I just want to start making some leaf shapes come out of here. And the way these leaves work, they sort of have pokey edges to them. So I'm just going to do that with a bunch of different brush strokes and then grab some of this green gold and drop that in. Leaves always look more interesting if you have lots of colors in them. My light is flickering a little bit. I don't know if that's coming through on the video. I'm going to have to change the light bulb, I think. And I do want these to bleed a little bit. This kind of style, I want them to mix and mingle with the flowers just a little bit. So I'm still using my filbert. You could easily use a round paintbrush for all of these techniques that I'm showing you, and a round paintbrush is the most common paintbrush, but I've been using my filbert a lot more lately, and I like it. I think it's nice. So the cool thing about adding foliage too is that if you have any gaps in your composition, foliage is great for filling that in. You know, if your composition looks unbalanced on one side, it's easy to fill that in. It's kind of relaxing to watch, isn't it? When I first started painting, I just would watch videos of people on Instagram and on YouTube just painting and kind of think like, oh, never be able to do that. But if that is the thing you're thinking, you can do it. It just takes practice. It takes time, but you can do it. Okay, like this. And these do typically grow. They kind of vine together on the ground. So these typically aren't one-off kind of flowers. They will be with other flowers. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think tomorrow is our Indian paintbrush day. And there is an interesting flower. That's a challenging one to draw because the petals are the leaves and they kind of just suddenly change color halfway through the petal. It goes from green to boom, red. So that's a little bit more challenging to paint because greens and reds don't typically go together too well. Okay, what are you guys thinking so far? Who's painting along with me? Anybody? And who can tell me in the comments and win 40 points that are exchangeable for absolutely nothing, except you get to say that you won 40 points. Who can tell me what the wet on dry watercolor technique is? If I wanted to add a little bit more fine detail here, I am going to grab one of my pointed round brushes. Here we go. Grab this pointed round just because I can get a bit of a finer point with it, you know, and this will make different leaf shapes also. Now I have transitioned from being somewhat accurate with this painting to not being accurate anymore because I'm adding a little bit of artistic license here with these leaves. But like I said, leaves are great because they just add so much to a painting. And they're not really distracting. They just fill in the empty spaces. And I like leaves. One of my favorite things to paint are leaves. Add a few other colors over here. Besides, when you're painting, you don't have to be strictly accurate. You can do whatever you want, which is one of the great things about painting for yourself. And it's just fun. Do what you want to do. All right, let me check. While that dries a little bit, I'm going to read your messages here. Okay, so most of you are watching and not painting along with me, but that's okay. I'm glad you're here. Shanna Lynn, when I said, what is wet on dry painting? She said it's when your watercolor's dry and you put some wet paint on top of it. Sandy says glazing. So, and Debbie says wet paint on dry paper, and that's all right. That's all correct. So when I'm adding these paints in here, right, you can see where the paint was still wet because we're getting these soft lines where it's hitting the water and it's all blending out. And that is super pretty. But if your whole painting is that, it's going to start to lose its interest and shape real fast and just get muddy. Wet on dry. Glazing is a type of wet on dry, Sandy. So I could glaze this. I could cover this with water again and then, put some more paint on it. I could put paint directly on top of it and glaze it. Or I can just add a lot of details with wet on dry. So if I go onto this leaf and put a line there, it's not going to bleed at all because that leaf is dry. And then where we're going to do this more in a minute is in adding all of the little vein details. So the reason they're not bleeding, so this one did bleed because that was still wet, and these didn't because it was dry already. So wet on dry is a really useful technique. And we can still see there's some puddles here. If you ever want it to dry a little faster, you can use a hair dryer. You can grab some paper towels and just soak it up. You can grab a dry brush, and the dry brush will kind of act as a sponge. So I'm just adding some darker colors in here because contrast is what makes a painting really good. So I'm not doing anything too specific with it except just putting some dark lines in because that will trick the eye into seeing shadows and highlights. Okay, so I'm just grabbing my Hooker's Green really straight from the palette, which if you've ever taken a class with me, I always tell everybody not to do. But you have to know the rules before you can break them. So I can break them now. You can break them too if you want. Okay, so just adding some contrast in, little marks here and there, especially back here underneath the flowers. Not a lot of light would get back there, so that's a good place to add that. Okay, that's good. I like that. Dry that brush off, and I'm going to grab a smaller brush, and this one is just a cheap brush I got somewhere. I don't even know where, maybe on Amazon. And it just has a fine point to it, and I hope that focuses. It's not focusing. Well, it has a fine point to it, and I'm hard on my brushes, so sometimes I use the expensive ones and sometimes I use the cheap little guys because they are a little bit cheaper to replace, which I inevitably will have to do. I'm just grabbing this palette here because it has this really bright pink on it that I was using earlier that I really like. Some red. I just grab some of that color because I like that. Okay, so on each of the flowers now, once you know those rough shapes, you can start to add some details in. So if I kind of add a little bit of a line here, you're going to start to see a petal pop out of this flower. Okay, and I'm just adding, not even outlining it. I wouldn't say I'm outlining it, but just giving that illusion of where the petals are. And then with the primroses, they usually have a vein that comes straight out like that. And then you can start to add the details. I'm going to zoom in here because it's a little bit tricky. Let me move this. Don't get motion sick, anybody? There we go. Now you'll be able to see how I'm doing these veins a little bit better. So they're very fine lines. I'm not using a lot of pressure. Okay, and then as I draw these in, I can even add a bit more water to my brush as I'm painting, and that will even give us a little bit more variation of hue so that I can show some of the shadows and the light there. Okay, so I'm not painting from a reference picture. I looked at a few pictures of these earlier just to remind myself what they look like, but I'm not painting from a reference picture. I'm just, once you know the shapes of things and you know the guidelines that you need, it's a lot easier to paint and to draw. In fact, you know what would be a cool thing to have in the membership? I'm just thinking out loud. Would be a little bit of a kind of like a cheat sheet of the different steps for different flowers. You know, I could upload the guidelines that I use for all different flowers step by step on one sheet of paper, and then it'd be really easy to just get familiar with drawing them that way. I like that. Who likes that idea? Should I do that? That would be a good idea, I think. Okay, so I'm just adding the details in. Also, if you're like me, you will inevitably cover your arm with paint. So that's another reason I like watercolor, though. If I was covered with oil paint, it'd be a lot harder to get off. Okay, I'm adding all the details, all the fine lines in. Here we go. Okay, and then in the center, where'd my yellow paint go? I'm gonna have yellow paint here with just a little tiny touch of green in it. In the center, I'm just gonna do these little marks that are there just to show that we have some more detail. Okay, it doesn't have to be super exact or anything, just little marks. So you can already probably start to see the difference between a flower like this that has all these wet and dry marks on it versus one next to it, which is still just a blob. And that is why I also tell people to be patient with themselves as they're painting, because it takes layers. It takes time and it takes layers to do a good watercolor painting. It's usually not going to look done and professional and the way you want it to look right away. So let's do another one. Let's do this one over here. 1 second. I just put my hand in the green paint. Okay. So just going to draw a very light outline here. I picked up a little bit of green paint with my brush, but that's okay because this is nice and loose. That is quite all right. And they do have that kind of straight line. And this is one example where the flowers kind of do the guideline for us, you know? Which is great. Okay, and then I'm going to start having the little tiny twists and turns. Like that. Yeah, so I see a couple of you are saying that the guide for the flowers would be fun. I think that's a fun idea. So that would probably entail, I would draw each flower in stages, and then in between each stage, I would scan that and put it all together in a document for each flower. So that would take a while, but I think that would be a really good resource. And that is the perfect thing for what I'm talking about. It's like the perfect example to have a membership like that where, you know, it'd be like a monthly subscription. You can come and go anytime that you want, but anytime that you want a little bit of extra help learning how to draw or paint florals, learning about florals, learning about botanical watercolor, that'd be fun. Do you know, I have so many books about botanical watercolors too. I could put up some scans of those books and some reviews of those books. They are so pretty, full of beautiful reproductions of paintings and prints from the past. Botanical painting really was popular before they had photographs during scientific expeditions and things. And they wouldn't do this kind of loose painting. They would be very exact about the structure of the plant. They would do dissections of the flowers and really make them exact, because then when they went back to wherever they were coming from, which was usually England, honestly, or one of the colonizing countries, when they went back to those countries, they would want to show people, like, this is what an orchid looks like, and they don't really grow here, but this is a palm tree, you know. And so they needed to have really accurate renditions, which is a lot of where the tradition of botanical painting comes from. And for sure, you've seen some of those reproductions around. When you start to look for them, you see them everywhere. Okay, so I see Cass is saying that she does not like the lines on her petals. And I'm going to venture a guess, though I don't know because I can't see her work, that she doesn't like them, that you don't like them, Cass, because they're a little bit too thick and maybe blobby, I'm gonna say. And that, if that is true for any of you, is strictly because you need to practice it. You need to practice your brush control. A lot of times people won't like the lines on things because it just looks too watery and too blobby. So you want to make sure you don't have too much paint on your brush. Let me zoom out here real quick. Okay, so you can start to see the difference between those, right? We have our very watery ones back here, and then we start to add detail. Now this one is dry, and even if I wanted to add a little bit more depth and a little bit more shading to that, that would be pretty easy. I would just come in here and glaze it with some water right over those lines. That green is still wet, but that's okay. Right, and then you can see how now we have a bit more of a shadow there. So what you want to do to practice your lines is, I'll just show you here, and I'm going to grab some dark purple paint, and then we will wrap up for today because it's already been 40 minutes. That went by really fast. What you want to do to practice your lines is with whatever brush you have, make sure your hand is on the table, and you're just going to pull your brush down and try and make the thinnest line that you can. Okay, so the thinnest line that you can with your brush. Then you're going to try and push down and make the thickest line that you can with your brush. And then to practice controlling it, you want to practice going back and forth between those, and you can just fill up a whole paper doing that. You can do it in different angles, and this is going to help you start to learn how your brush works and how to control it and apply consistent pressure. So that is a great little tip. Okay, so I'm done for now. I think I'm going to wait until daylight tomorrow to finish this one up and post it, but hopefully you guys enjoyed learning about that. I think that this is one of the cooler looking loose paintings that we've done together, and I can't wait to see what you do. So hopefully that was pretty clear. Let me know. Okay, you guys, I love your comments. Thank you so much. Sue, thank you so much for being here live. I hope you have a beautiful day. Your day is just getting started as mine winds down, so I hope you have a beautiful day today. Thank you so much. Bye.